Please listen carefully.
Welcome to Clubmen 1645, and today we are in Pinburn. And why are we in Pinburn, you may ask? Well, Pinburn was the birthplace of Robert Frampton, who was born in Pinburn on February the 26th, 1622, and he went on later to serve as the master at Glenham School. But we're sat here today to talk about Robert Frampton because we're stood in front of I'm sat in front of a cross which was knocked down by parliamentarian troops in 1645, which is a nice note to talk about Pinburn and the connection with the Civil War with Robert Frampton. But later on we should go into Gloucester, and we should go into Standish, and we should talk more about Robert Frampton there, and then we should also talk about Robert Frampton and that famous battle with Cromwell's troops on Hambledon Hill. I'm just going to pan round now and just show you St Peter's Church in Pinburn, which is next to the cross here, which Cromwell's troops knocked the top off, because on the 16th of January in 1645, a parliamentary soldier was buried in that churchyard in St Peter's. So I think Sheila's going to pan round and show you now St Peter's Church. So join us later on when we leave Pinburn in Dorset, the birthplace of Robert Frampton, to join us in Standish. And then from Standish we shall go to Gloucestershire and Gloucester Cathedral, where Robert Frampton became the Dean of Gloucester Cathedral and the Bishop of Gloucestershire later on in the 17th century. Right, we're still in Pinburn, and I've come up to look at the ancient Longbow, which is behind me. Just there, you can see Sheila behind me there, and we were talking to a couple of people in town in Pinburn, and they were saying Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's wife, used to stay in Pinburn at the hunting lodge there, or I think it's the old rectory now, it's a private house, but there you go. Here comes Sheila. Hello Sheila.
Hello.
I'm recording something on this camera, my own camera.
Hello.
Hello, there you go. Sheila Wiggins from Retro 8. Welcome to Clubmen 1645, and we're on Hambledon Hill, and we're on Hambledon Hill with the Clubmen map. Now Stewie, the artist over there, is doing some paintings in watercolour, and he's concentrating on what he's doing. So we've come over to here to talk about the map and Robert Frampton, who is on the map. Now where is he?
He is just below.
There he is, Robert Frampton. Now Robert Frampton became the Bishop of Gloucester, but he was at the Battle of Hambledon Hill on August the 4th, 1645, and he was up here with his 4 brothers. Now they were all wounded in the battle, and one of his brothers actually had to crawl back to St Mary's Church where the prisoners were taken after the Battle of Hambledon Hill, and Cromwell took the prisoners back to St Mary's Church. Now late in the evening his sister came out here to find the bodies of the brothers because they feared the worst. They thought they were all killed, but they weren't. They were actually held and shot in church, so they were released next day. There is an account of it in Robert Frampton's biography, and it states, Frampton and his 4 brothers have been in the engagement with Cromwell's dragoons on Hambledon Hill. His brothers all wounded, one so bad he had to be carried back to the St Mary's Church, now being used as the jail for the club prisoners. Fearing the worst, their sister spent 2 hours searching by lantern on the hill for her dead brothers. As would have it, they survived. All 4 of her brothers survived the battle. They were released from St Mary's the next day. So that's an account of Robert Frampton at the Battle of Hambledon Hill. He would have been here with Thomas Brevel, and he was one of the leading ministers up here in the battle. But there's another note, because later on he moved to London, he was preaching in London, he went to Aleppo at some stage in 1655, I think it was. But Samuel Pepys witnessed Robert Frampton at the pulpit, and there is an account of it, and it says, "To my great joy, I think the best sermon for goodness in orator that I ever heard in my life. The truth is, he preaches the most like an apostle that ever I have heard of in a man." So he was obviously up here at the time giving commands and orders, and he was obviously leader of men. But there you go, Robert Frampton and the Clubmen map on Hambledon Hill. 1645, and today we're in Gloucestershire. Now we're in Gloucestershire because we come out to a village called Standish, and it's just outside Gloucestershire. This is why we're here, because he lived at Standish in 1685, and he was the Bishop of Gloucester, not Gloucestershire, and he ended up preaching from this church here. Now this is the church in Standish. Now he became the Dean of Gloucester in 1673, and he became the Bishop of Gloucester in 1681. But we've come here today to look at this church because he's buried here. And we all know Robert Frampton from the Battle of Hambledon Hill, where he stood side by side with Thomas Brevel, and was locked in the church with Thomas Brevel in Shroton. But we've come to Gloucester and this church here, and we're going to go inside and look at his grave.
He saw his days out here, didn't he?
He saw his days out here, yeah.
And he lived quite a long time. He was 1708.
He lived
was it? 1708?
from 1622 to 1708,
Okay.
the 25th of May. Okay, now they got this great booklet. It's got some information I didn't even know about Frampton, and I know everything about Frampton. I don't really, but I sound like I do. Now, after the revolution of 1688, Frampton found himself in an intolerable position. Although he had protested against the Romanising practices of King James, he yet could not take an oath of allegiance to William and Mary until James should release him from his previous oath. So he became the leader of the non-jurors in the country. Clergy, for conscience sake, suffered ejection from their livings. Frampton was dispossessed of the bishopric of Gloucester, but was allowed to live at Standish until his death in 1708. I don't know what it says on the other side.
Yeah, he was considered, you know, people had a lot of respect for him, which is why they let him stay, wasn't it? I was reading. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he paid £400 towards the rectory here when he
Yes.
helped build a place just outside Gloucester, which was a fortification for the Civil War. But I can't. We can drive over there. It's
Yes.
of the Vines, isn't it?
Yes.
The Vines. It's a sconce. I think it was a manor built by the abbot of Gloucester. He was rebuilding it, and then he lost his money and had to leave. What we're going to do now is we're going to go inside the church in Standish, and we're going to look at where Robert Frampton is buried, because he's just buried to the north side, left side.
No, the north of the altar.
The north of the altar. And he didn't preach from the altar, he had to preach from the step.
Chancel steps.
Chancel step, because he wouldn't preach from the altar. But we'll go inside and have a look. So follow me. Church, yep, and in 1645 Robert Frampton was fighting on Hambledon Hill with Thomas Breval, but in 1685 he was in this church in Standish in Gloucestershire, and he was preaching from that step in the chancel behind me and not from the altar. But we're going to walk up here now and look at where he was buried. So follow me. Here we are, the grave of Robert Frampton. Follow me. And we've just been talking to the lady down there, and she thinks this is the original place where he was buried, because a lot of these graves have been moved, but she thinks this is actually where he was buried, Robert Frampton. Right, we left Standish, where Robert Frampton was buried, and we're in the parish of Hynham, over, and behind me is a sconce, and it's just outside Gloucester. And Robert Frampton was going to rebuild a manor house that was here after the Civil War, which was badly damaged by three sides of parliamentarians and Wallace soldiers that sort of overtook this sconce at the time for the Battle of Gloucester, at the siege of Gloucester. But after the Civil War, Robert Frampton started rebuilding a manor house that was in that sconce, and he never finished it. I don't really know why, but he didn't finish it, and he ended up in Standish. So, but there you are. But this is where the story ends with Robert Frampton, with his house building schemes around the Shire of Gloucestershire. Gloucestershire and Gloucestershire.
In the parish of Hynham.
That's it. So, but check out the Clubmen site, Clubmen 1645, work in progress. Come to think of it, I think I know why he didn't finish it, because of I didn't finish this manor house here because of the Glorious Revolution, of course, and he was deselected as the Bishop of deposed.
Dispossessed, I
Dispossessed
think,
of being the Bishop of Gloucestershire. But I do know that he was working on the Great Hall, and there was a lot of building material here which he paid for, and then he just abandoned it after the Glorious Revolution. And we popped in here from a trip from Worcester. We popped back. We were at Standish before to talk about Robert Frampton. We ended up in 1685, but in 1673.
Yep.
He was the Dean of Gloucester here, so he would have preached from here up to 1681.
8 years.
8 years, because then he was made the bishop. But for 8 years he preached from here, Gloucester Cathedral. And this is the cloisters, and they're doing some practicing in the background there. But we'll go in a minute and we'll show you where he preached from. But yeah, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yep, Robert Frampton, Dean of Gloucester. Gloucester Cathedral, and in 1673 Robert Frampton would have been stood right here, and he preached from here for 8 years. website, like I said earlier, Clubmen in 1645, work in progress.